it's really, really a healthy balance. Again, acknowledge the pain. I think it's great for your kids to see you cry. I think it's great for them to see you express emotion and say, Mom is really sad right now, but I'm okay, you're okay, and we're going to be okay.
Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. I'm a summer camp director, writer, and speaker, and I've had the privilege of working with thousands of children, teenagers, young adult counselors, and parents over the past 3 decades. My husband, Steve, and I are raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 15 to 25. So my interest in raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults is personal as well as professional. Hi, Sunshine Parenting listeners. Just want to take a moment to thank you for helping launch my book out into the world this year. My book, Happy Campers, 9 Summer Camp Secrets for Raising Kids Who Become Thriving Adults, came out in May. And I've received so many great emails and texts and Instagram pictures and messages about things that you found helpful about the book. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your support. For those of you who are reading the book or interested in reading the book in 2020, I have an online book club. Each month, I do a live Zoom meeting where I cover one of the chapters of the book. If you'd like to join, you can find out more information by visiting my website and clicking on the book page. My website is sunshine-parenting.com, and just click on the book link to find out more about where you can pick up a copy of Happy Campers and how you can join the online book club. I've heard from several readers who are giving my book as a gift to friends or even to their children if they are grandparents this year for Christmas or for Hanukkah. If you are giving Happy Campers as a gift and would like me to sign a personalized book plate for the recipient, please send me an email and let me know the name of the person to inscribe the book to and the address where you'd like it sent. I'll also include one of my bookmarks that shares all 9 secrets. Thank you so much for reading my new book, and I appreciate you getting in touch with me and writing reviews and letting me know the ideas that you've learned from the book that you are using. In episode 118, I'm talking with Jennifer Levin. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist specializing in health crises or transitions, especially those related to grief and loss, illness, and growth after trauma. Dr. Levin has her doctorate from the University of California at Los Angeles in public health, where she studied the psychosocial needs of women with breast cancer. From the older adults and dying patients Dr. Levin worked with, she learned a lot about living and pursuing a life that is meaningful and fulfilling until the very end. She currently focuses her work with children, adolescents, teens, and adults experiencing extreme emotional or physical pain during monumental life transitions. As parents and professionals who work with children, we often really don't have much experience in counseling kids or families who are going through grief. So it's really great to have the resource of Dr. Levin and all that she knows about the ways that we can help our kids through grief and how we can find the resources we need to get the outside help and counseling that our families need when we're going through a crisis. What I found most encouraging about my conversation with Dr. Levin was just that for many people, even very traumatic experiences can lead to post-traumatic growth, which is what we all want for ourselves and our children following these kinds of traumatic incidents. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode with Dr. Jennifer Levin, which we recorded live in her office in Pasadena, California. Well, today I'm excited to have an in-person interview with Dr. Jennifer Levin. I'm here in her office in Pasadena. Welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, Jennifer.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we were connected through Tina Payne Bryson, who we both really enjoy her work. And your topic of kind of what you've been studying and practicing and experiencing is basically death and dying and grief counseling. Is that a good description of sort of in a lot of different areas, but that sort of summarizes the work you do?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I specialize in traumatic grief, which is an unexpected, sudden loss that people experience. I like to say somebody has a regular day on Monday, something traumatic happens, and their whole life is completely turned upside down. And I specialize in how to get through the aftermath, both addressing the trauma and the grief that an individual or their family are experiencing.
And before we recorded, we had some time to get to know each other over lunch. And we talked just a lot about you basically step in with schools, with different settings, with families, really right after sometimes these kind of traumatic loss, death. And you also run some support groups for some different people. Why don't you talk about the groups that you have right now?
Sure. I have a traumatic grief group, and I think it's kind of one of the only ones in the area. And most of my participants are female, and they're between the ages of 20 and 40. And they've experienced, or they're survivors of homicide, a loved one who has taken their life, car accidents, drug overdoses, again, those really sudden things. And it's really impacted them greatly in ability to function and get by with their day-to-day tasks, and then also the grief that they're experiencing as well. I also have a teen grief program, and this one's fantastic. We have kids from about 12 to 18. Sometimes it's a real heavy group and we're talking a lot about the loss. Other times it's a lot of fun and games, and it's just an opportunity for kids, or I should say preteens and teens, to be with one another and to be normal and to fit in and not be that kid at school that everyone's staring at because they've experienced a death in their family. And then finally, I have a spousal loss group, spousal or partner. And I think that one's really important because general grief groups will address so many different types of loss, but this really focuses on what you experience after the death of a loved one who happens to be your partner that you've built a life with, and then trying to figure out who you are after that person is gone, and kind of figuring out your identity.
Yeah, it's funny. And just in the past couple months, I've been exposed to more people who work sort of in this field, helping kids past trauma. A guest I had a couple weeks ago, Ruth Gerson, was on my podcast, and she has a whole book. She's a psychiatrist out of NYU, and just talking about things that we can do to help kids and adolescents handle like trauma that they've experienced in a way that they come out the other end stronger. And you have a term for this.
Yeah.
So can you please kind of describe what you mean when you say post-traumatic growth?
Sure. Actually, it's not my term.
Okay.
The term came from Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, and they are two researchers who coined this term, I think about 30 years ago. And it's basically a growth that someone will experience after a trauma. And what's important here, it's not like they experience a trauma and then they return to baseline or wellness or just being able to function, but instead their life has significantly changed for the better due to the experience they had with the trauma. And it normally happens that people will experience post-traumatic growth in one of four areas, and that is they have deeper relationships, a better way of relating to others. They have increased personal strength. They have positive spiritual changes, or they may have a stronger appreciation for life in general. The growth can happen in any of the areas, just one of the areas, but actually I love this concept because I get asked all of the time, how do you do this type of work? How are you constantly experiencing or exposed to trauma and death and loss? And it's the actual post-traumatic growth. And I don't get to see all of my clients all throughout the entire grieving process. Some may stay for a couple months, some may stay for a couple years. But there's something that is pretty amazing by watching someone come in right after a loss, working through them to address both the trauma and grief, and then having them say, oh my goodness, I think I've grown in this way, and to be able to focus on that. So it's kind of what keeps me going in this work as well.
Well, and that's a really hopeful message, because unfortunately, we and our children are inevitably going to face something. Maybe it's not as severe as some of the kind of tragedies or things that some of your clients have had to go through, but kind of eventually everyone needs to face grief of some kind. And it's hopeful to be thinking about that it doesn't have to inevitably lead to just a disaster. So especially with children and adolescents, and that's what I kind of want to focus on in our conversation today. Absolutely. Because my audience is mostly parents and people who work with children. And, many of us have been caught a little blindsided by experiences that either kids share with us, in the setting of camp or school or in our relationship with them, where they share about something really hard that they've been through. So I'd love for just you to give a little bit of advice for, parents, caregivers, people who work with kids. What are some, in the immediate aftermath, maybe, of some kind of traumatic loss? What are some of the things that can be helpful for kids?
Great question. There's been so much done in terms of post-traumatic growth in the research with adults, and not as much known when it comes to children. It's kind of a newer thing. There's different stages, and we actually don't even talk as much about the stages of grief anymore. There's ways to address it in terms of tasks and other things, but right after an immediate loss that's been traumatic, the first thing to do is to assure safety, reestablish some normalcy, a sense of routine, a sense of structure, a sense of predictability. When the world feels chaotic and out of control, just containment. And I think that's so important for kids. And we see behavioral problems come up, problems with sleep, academics, friends, when there is no routine or structure or normalcy. So that's really kind of the first thing. And that may not necessarily lead to post-traumatic growth, but more of stabilization, which is the first thing we have to do before we can start addressing trauma and grief. After a while, post-traumatic growth is something that happens over a significant period of time. Adults can play a huge role in, number one, decreasing the chances that a child will have a long-term difficulties and increasing the chances for post-traumatic growth. And first of all, one of the most important things is modeling. So modeling positive behavior, coping mechanisms, communication, all of that as the adult, and showing the child, the teen, hey, it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be frightened. But then again, hear those feelings in a very loving, non-judgmental way. But then again, going back and reassuring safety, which can be really difficult in this world today when so much is unpredictable. And sometimes we have to say, I'm not sure how this is going to play out in the future, but right now, you're safe. I got you. You're okay. I love you. All of your needs can be met right now. And giving them just a really, really strong foundation. One of the things that kind of goes without saying is parents and adults have to take care of themselves first before they're able to give this to kids. Kids are able to tell when it's inauthentic, it's insincere, when the parent's running on empty. Other things that might help foster post-traumatic growth, positive relationships with adults. And if it's not a parent, then it's a teacher, it's a coach, it's a religious figure, it's some adult that can, because there are times when we're experiencing trauma that we're tapped out as adults. And that's okay. You don't have to be the one giving all the time, as long as you make sure that your child is exposed to these positive relationships. Teaching resiliency skills. Kids are amazing in their resiliency. It's interesting. One of the questions I get often from parents is my kid grieving okay? They're smiling. They're having fun. They don't seem to be sad all the time.
Right.
And I have to spend a lot of time talking about how kids and adults react different to grief and trauma. I think it's wonderful that kids can float in and out, in and out. And when they're in the moment, the feelings are intense and they're difficult and they're scary and overwhelming. But again, with the right support and encouragement and activities and physical activity, then they're going to transition out and to be able to be okay and have fun with their friends. So they go in and out, whereas I think adults get stuck more in that deep sadness and especially a lot of the traumatic symptoms. Another thing that's really important is that we do sensory-based activities for kids. We teach them mindfulness skills. We teach them how to be present. We use deep breathing. We use guided imagery. I think I said visualizations, things that help them learn how to take control of their situation and giving them positive feedback and praise every time they use a great coping skill. Maybe it's drawing, writing a story, something with creative expression. Again, we as adults have such a role in teaching our kids how to express themselves, how to get these feelings out, and then how to cope with them.
Yeah, that's all so beautiful. I loved your kind of before we recorded, you talked about how sometimes you'll see a family right after an event. And I even think that's a beautiful thing because even though everyone's going to have different reactions or how they're going to respond, just knowing this is something that we're going to all need help with. And we're going to all need different help, and it's going to come in different ways, but we're going to provide that help. I think a family that takes that step and just immediately, gets the whole family, because that is part of the issue, is that like usually if a child is grieving about, something, usually the adults who are closest to them are also grieving. I mean, it could be a sibling that they've lost or an aunt or uncle or whoever, but it's so complicated because the adults who are there to care for the child are also grieving. So I think there's just that important thing of getting that help, that outside help, even if your child appears to be fine, which they may, and they're, like you said, they could be so resilient or at an age where it's just really, they're going to get past it much more quickly than maybe you are. But even so, for them to be aware that, if these feelings come up at any time, there are these resources, and my parent or caregiver is going to get me to those resources or can connect me with them. So I think that's a really important thing. The other thing I was thinking as you were talking is I do feel a lot of what I end up talking to parents about is, parents are so fearful and they're living in a time where, everything is scary. And I know that some parents, like for example, spend a lot of time talking to their kids about school shootings. And I know a lot of schools are doing like lots of drills and lockdown drills. And, the drills themselves have proven to be very traumatic, especially for very young children who don't understand. So part of and maybe this is wrong and you can correct me, but I think part of our role as adults too is just deciding how much of the fear we need to expose our children to. And I think it varies by age, but I think part of kind of our role is to be real with them and authentic. I'm sad and I'm grieving too. And we're not going to sit here and watch the news about it. If it's a friend or whatever it is, we're not going to dwell on it. I remember, this will date me, my kids were little when 9/11 occurred. And I remember the day, the morning it happened. I don't even normally watch anything or whatever, but I mean, I immediately turned it off when someone called me and told me that I turned it off. And my kids went to school that day. And when you said that normalcy thing, when adults need to grieve, and I mean, I know that's like more of a global kind of thing, not a personal grief, but I think if kids can still be going to school, being at recess, having their normal day, if you make them sit with you glued to the TV watching some horrible tragic news, I just don't think, depending on their age, when they're ready, maybe as adolescents or teenagers, they could be ready for that. But, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, they're better getting it through your filter, So part of it is just also, I think, letting your kid, I remember my dad crying when he was telling me about his mom dying. And it was meaningful to me, oh my gosh, Dad never cries. And it was good that I got to see, oh, Dad's really sad about this. I was only 4, and I remember it wasn't traumatic. It was just memorable because I was like, oh my gosh, that's his mommy.
Yeah.
That's so sad, and that I think is good. My kids have seen me sob about things. And while not for hours and hours and days, but they have seen sometimes my reaction. And so it's like, you're a real person and you're authentic, and you're not going to make them suck them into your exact grief or whatever. Yeah. So what is that balance of, in a family or whatever it is, talking about it, bringing it up? If the kids seems to be handling things well, do you keep checking in about it? What's the best course of action for parents who, it's a grandparent who died, or a pet, or whatever it may be, and, the parent is feeling it very, very deeply. Like, it might be their parent.
Right.
And it's the child's grandparent. In that case, like, what's your advice for parents on how much to bring the kids into it, how often to bring it up, that kind of thing?
Gosh, I wish there was a formula for this. As you know, grief is such a unique experience for every person, for every family. Everybody in a family grieves differently. There's research that shows male and females grieve differently, gender differences. So it's really hard to say. I am really big on acknowledgement, and acknowledging, an adult acknowledging that they're sad or they're grieving, a child acknowledging that they're fearful, and that being the very first step. Let's acknowledge. But then, and I was thinking back to what you were saying about 9/11, you acknowledge, and then you focus on what you're capable of doing. You don't let the fear run things. You say, okay, given this space, you focus on what we're able to do. And, getting back to your comment, I've seen everything. I've seen things where a sibling will die, a parent won't talk about it. This is too sad, we don't talk about it, and then the kid completely disappears from the family life. And that's very, very confusing, because they then learn, this is something I can't talk about.
Right.
It's scary. I've seen parents where one parent will die and the child is left, and then the child will tell me, I think both of my parents have died, because the second parent, the living parent, is so overcome with grief that they can't be there for the child. And so it's really, really a healthy balance. Again, acknowledge the pain. I think it's great for your kids to see you cry. I think it's great for them to see you express emotion and say, Mom is really sad right now, but I'm okay, you're okay, and we're going to be okay.
Right.
And then to talk about that. And then as far as you said, yes, the check-ins are great. As you know, kids are more likely, especially as they get older, to talk to their friends than their parents. And so I have so many parents who will say to me, they just say, fine, everything's okay. No, I'm not sad. And so you may not get a lot verbally. The checking in is important because it gives the message, I'm here if you want to talk about it. This is a safe thing for us to talk about it. If you don't, that's okay. So what you do is you monitor other things. Are they still socializing with their friends? Are they doing well in school? Are they sleeping? Are they eating? Are they doing extracurricular activities? When you start to see issues there, then that's kind of a red flag that even though they're not talking about the grief, it's definitely impacting them. And it might be time at that point to get a school counselor involved, to seek outside support from a therapist, talk to a pediatrician. So again, I also like to remind people that we grieve the way we live. If we're someone who doesn't share our feelings very often, when we experience grief, we're not all of a sudden going to become someone who talks about all of our feelings.
Right. Okay, so this has been so great. I have so many other things that I'd love to talk to you about. One of the things that I know, and this is again just from my personal experience with friends who've lost a spouse or someone very close to them, is to keep talking about the person.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the things, I just fell into this information that some people think, well, gosh, they're not crying right now, better not bring the person up. The last thing when someone's grieving they want is for people to forget this person that was so, so important to them.
So I actually want to give you or share with your readers one tip that can be really helpful for kids and families because, like you said, it is important to keep talking about the person that is gone. And so a lot of times what I have people do is get a beautiful bowl, any shape, size, and a stack of index cards. And to keep it in the living room, on the kitchen table, wherever. And anytime you have a memory of the person, the dog, the loved one who's died, you write it down on the index card and you put it in the bowl. And then if you're having a tough grieving day, or perhaps it's a holiday, a birthday of someone that you love, everyone gets to go around and to read the memories that are in the bowl. And my clients who have done this have just really shared that it's a wonderful experience because the best thing you can do, like you said, is to keep talking about the person who has died. And this is a great way to keep memories and family times together alive.
Oh, that is just beautiful. And how awesome, too, for if you think about, like, I'm just envisioning a teenage boy who might not be super open about sharing, even just to listen to the stories. And the best is if people can laugh about some of the memories. That's just a beautiful activity that I think almost you could do that with any kind of loss.
Yep.
Of, even
Absolutely.
like you said, like with young kids with a pet.
Yep. Grandma, grandpa, anything.
Yeah, I love that idea. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Okay, so thank you so much, Jennifer, for being on the podcast today. I've learned a lot from you. Tell my listeners where they can find you and find more resources on this really important topic.
Sure. I have a brand new site that is just recently launched. It's called From Grief to Growth, and it focuses on how to get online support and resources after you've experienced a sudden loss of someone in your family. And there you can get me at jennifer@grieftogrowth.com. You can also reach me through my private practice site, which is called Therapy Heals. And I have a lot of resources on my website about kids, about grief, traumatic grief. And again, you can email me there through jennifer@therapyheals.com.
And one of the important things that I think is an important resource to share with schools and camps is that when a camp or a school or other institution is dealing with any kind of grief over a loss of, a staff member, a parent, whatever it might be, you can be a consultant basically for them. They can call you, you can either come in or you can help them kind of find resources, which is really important because most of us, fortunately, don't have to deal with these things all the time, but you're very experienced at dealing with this and helping just guide people through this experience. So thank you so much for being on today.
It was my pleasure. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. I hope you found my conversation with Dr. Jennifer Levin as informative and helpful as I did. As always, you can find the show notes and links to Jennifer's website and resources by visiting my website at sunshine-parenting.com and searching for episode 118. If you want to be sure not to miss any upcoming podcast episodes or posts, I invite you to subscribe to my weekly email list. You can subscribe at my website or by texting the word HAPPY to 345-345. I really love hearing from podcast listeners, so feel free to send me an email with your tips, ideas, or suggestions at audrey@sunshine-parenting.com. If you're a regular listener and you enjoy the podcast, I'd appreciate you taking a moment to give Sunshine Parenting a rating and review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. And thank you for joining me on this journey to raise a generation of kids who become thriving adults.